What are the bombshell stories missed and for the year of 2019? I never had the opportunity to do a year in review show, and this is not necessarily going to be a year in review, more so the stories that I thought were major stories that didn't get the airplay that I think they deserved. I want you to put down what you think in the bottom, and even you can send it on Twitter. But these are the ones I think are, I'm sorry, do two things at once. But these are the stories that I think are the top three. I think I initially said four, but the top three blockbuster stories that for the most part were either ignored, were missed, or were not given the credit they deserved. There's some honorable mentions in this. The honorable mentions going to the FISA thing, because there is some talk about that and Republicans are doing something about it, so I can't necessarily include that one. But I think the other ones are apt. Welcome to the Soapbox. My name is Jamarl Thomas. This is the Progressive Soapbox. Guys, if you dig this content, please like, share, subscribe. You can always support PayPal, Patreon. I continuously say this content is brought to you by you because in real terms, it is. Number three. And Mrs. Thomas may be able to add like little insertions into this, but number three. The OPCW says there is a chemical weapons attack. Or there's a chemical weapons attack, supposedly, in Syria, in Douma, Syria. The United States jumps to account. We got to launch missiles. We got to, get Assad in place. Now, a lot of people, like me, said, well, wait a minute, this doesn't entirely make sense. A, where's your evidence for this? Now, the evidence for this came in the form of the OPCW. The OPCW is supposed to be non-biased. We're just looking at the facts. We're just trying to determine what happened and whether or not a chemical weapons strike occurred in this proximity. Syria said we didn't do it, meaning Bashar al-Assad said we didn't do it. U.S. and Western powers asserted that it happened. My thing was, what evidence do you have for this? And this attack doesn't entirely make logical sense. The OPCW do their fact-finding mission. They come back and they put out a report. Now, the report indicates or makes this assertion that it's chlorine, that there was some kind of chlorine chemical weapons attack taking place. Problem. The U.S. and Western powers do their strikes. Problem. Leaks start to take place. One of the leaks comes back as a document that the OPCW said was indeed true, that found that some of the scenes that they found were set up, meaning they were planted. Essentially, people who were part of the rebels or the terrorists setting up conditions to make it look as if something took place. More leaks. Recently, WikiLeaks put out several documents directly contesting what the OPCW found, and not just directly contesting what the OPCW found. Members being, I don't want to necessarily say threatened, but aggressively pushed to take a particular position that they didn't necessarily see in their results. Basically, what these people said and what people who were part of this say, specifically with the documents that were being released by WikiLeaks, also with the gentleman who came forward and gave this hour-long dissertation of what he encountered while he was working at the OPCW. And effectively, the report that they put out was not the report that they wrote. Meaning the higher-ups at the OPCW changed the report around to make it look like a chemical weapons strike took place, when not only did it not take place, but it looked like it was set up by rebels in order to try to implicate the Syrian government. This is one of the documents that WikiLeaks put out yesterday. This is a purpose of meeting, but I want you to notice something. The purpose of the visit was twofold. 4 staff members from the OPCW traveled to the state party to conduct discussions with experts in toxicology and clinical pharmacology with a professional background in medical CW protection, chemical weapon protection. The purpose of the visit was twofold: to solicit expert advice on the value of exhuming suspected victims of alleged chemical attack in Duma, in particular whether in exposure to chlorine gas, since no nerve agents was detected in the environmental or bio samples. Meaning, we didn't find any of the chemical agents in this, so the only agent they were testing for, we're looking for, is chlorine. Now, right here. Regarding the second item above, the chief expert summed up his conclusions by offering two possibilities that included, on the one hand, the real chemical attack, and on the other, the possibility that events being a propaganda exercise. He elaborates on the possibilities. With respect to consistency of the observed and reported symptoms of the alleged victims with possible exposure to chlorine gas or similar, the expert was conclusive, it was more than one, in their statements that there was no correlation between the symptoms of chlorine exposure. In particular, they stated that the onset of excessive frothing as a result of the pulmonary edema observed in the photos and reported by witnesses would not occur in short time period between the reported occurrence of the alleged incident and the time the videos were recorded. Let's go to this part. The OPCW team gathered after the meeting and reviewed the salient points discussed. It was agreed upon by all present that the key takeaway message from the meeting was that the symptoms observed were inconsistent with exposure to chlorine, and no other obvious candidate chemical causing the symptoms could be identified. Now, the people who were there came out and said that this was not a chemical exposure, including one of the kids. There was a kid that was used for a propaganda exercise that said, oh God, look, this kid is exposure to these chemicals. Well, that kid comes out and his father comes out and said that didn't happen. And if you don't want to take their point of view from it, at the very least, you could take the documents from the OPCW itself. WikiLeaks has been releasing a trough of these documents directly contesting what the OPCW put out as their report. My point is, the people who were on this fact-finding mission who went out said, this looks like somebody set this up. This is inconsistent with something that would have been delivered by either a bomb, and the symptoms are inconsistent with chlorine. Meaning what the OPCW put out is not what the people on the fact-finding mission found. The report from the OPCW was bent and contorted, rigged as such, essentially to go after Syria. The catch here is, it was widely reported beforehand that the terrorists themselves had access to chemical weapons, and considering they were in those areas, looks like at the very least it would be a question as to why would Bashar al-Assad do this. My question had always been, he has 90% of his territory back, and you're telling me that he's releasing a chemical weapon. The man has clung to power like grim death. And one thing that the Western powers keep saying, if there's a chemical weapon strike, if there's a chemical weapon strike. So you're telling me that the guy who clung to power is not a logical actor. He's just such a bad guy villain that he would do something that is entirely against his material interests. Russia and Syria are backing him. His country has been relatively stabilized. The one thing that the terrorists need is a chemical weapon strike. And lo and behold, we have a chemical weapon strike. And media says he's a bad guy. He did it. They just went along with it. This story should be bigger than what it is right now. And the fact that even places like the New York Times was covering the chlorine bomb, 2 floors of an apartment building. Well, what the fact-finding mission actually is showing in those leaked documents, that stuff was set up. Media hasn't covered that part. They've only covered the first part. That story is a bombshell that is missed. It would mean that an agency that is supposed to be neutral in its findings is not neutral in its findings. Why? Where have I heard that before? Oh, right, the OAS in regards to the Bolivian coup. These organizations that are cloaked in this notion of impartiality, giving these, you could say, answers that are by no means impartial and entirely political, suiting a very specific agenda. In this case, the goal was to topple the Bashar al-Assad government. That didn't happen despite this organization coming out with something that we are now finding to be faulty, or at the very least, challenged. Number two, I debate it over, but I think it works. Mainstream media and their absolute acquiescence to a particular perspective of the world orienting itself around government. Now, if you were in, I don't know, Bangladesh and you had Bangladeshi TV, if you were watching the BBC, if you were watching, I don't know, China Today or maybe RT, at the very least, you have this idea that, okay, these things are, or even Telesur English, Telesur, these are paid for by state organizations, so fair enough. They may accrue their points of view around issues of state, especially if they're not like English language. Like if you're in the United States and you're watching RT, well, those people are American. If you're watching Telesur, well, those people are American, English. But if you're watching that channel in its own country, it would have a very particular point of view, and it would make sense because they call themselves state media. But the United States doesn't do that. We have corporate media, and our corporate media supposedly are impartial. Here's that word again. Or at the very least, objective. Now, I've made the point that objectivity don't exist. You always have a stake in the ground and you orient yourself around something. Human beings are indeed human beings, and ideology, anywhere you are, is where you're at. So this notion that these guys are somehow floating above it all and making certain decisions as if they're pronouncements from this neutral space, nonsense. And the very framing of it, to some degree, is dishonest. So if we're going to go with this notion of media has either flagrantly ignored or warped various stories over the course of the year. And it is astonishing to watch when you're not necessarily in the mindset or on that wavelength. Just thinking about it. The Iraq War. This is within my lifetime, by the way. But I'm making a point with the Iraq War. No, this wasn't this year. But there's been no accounting for that. They trumpeted the U.S. perspective of things. 1 million Iraqis killed, 3,000 or 4,000 Americans dead, $7 trillion spent. The media trumpeted that war without being critical to the government and its story. And this is after the Vietnam War. Meaning the precedent was set that governments lie. And despite the fact that precedent being set, it didn't stop them from understanding that in the Spanish-American War. It didn't stop them from understanding that in the Vietnam War, nor did it get in their way for the Iraq War. And yet, at some point, you would think, if they did it once, the precedent has been set. Maybe they would do it again, especially in a situation where governments have every impetus, impetus is not the right word, every incentive to lie. Every incentive in the world to lie. The OPCW claims are major. And they are flagrantly, right now, ignoring that story. Twitter went so far as to take somebody off. They are ignoring and trying to bury that story. Russiagate. The central thesis of Russiagate was that Trump was working with the Russians. And for 2.5 years, the media trumpeted that narrative, finding one thing after the next and getting it wrong, always in one direction, against Trump. Were they being objective, floating in that neutral space, as they were finding and getting it wrong one time after the next? When Mueller came out and pointed out that, there's no link here. When the Inspector report came out showing that all of this attentiveness to the Steele dossier was found to be lacking. But that didn't stop them from going with this notion and putting people like Brennan on to tell them what they wanted
for example,
to most
this week
hear.
on Friday, not knowing anything about it. But Friday is the day that the grand jury indictments come down. And also this Friday is better than next Friday because next Friday is the 15th of March, which is the Ides of March. And I don't think Robert Mueller will want to have that dramatic flair of the Ides of March when he is going to be delivering what I think are going to be his indictments, the final indictments, as well as the report that he gives to the Attorney General.
What makes you believe that he has more indictments?
Because he hasn't addressed the issues related to criminal conspiracy as well as any individuals.
Criminal conspiracy involving the Russian influence?
Russians, yes, yeah. I think it was very,
and
in
that's
terms of
an area,
American person, U.S. persons.
That's an area you know something about. That investigation was developing while you were still on the job.
This is Brennan, head of the CIA at the time of the Russiagate stuff. Brennan is being looked at right now by John Durham, who's looking into elements of the origins of Russiagate. Brennan was head of the CIA at the time. John Durham wants to know, did he have anything to do with the origins of this investigation? Brennan is here implying. Now, Brennan has lied to Congress flagrantly, and nobody raided his house like Roger Stone. Dealing with spying on Congress, by the way. But Brennan is sitting here giving this impression that he has secret information. He knows something that the public doesn't know. And because he was head of the CIA and Lawrence O'Donnell is asking him these questions, that there is more here than there actually is. 2.5 years. They did this. No reflection. The IG report comes out and said that the Steele dossier that these guys have been boosting, by the way, and that they made it seem as if there was more of a reality to it than it actually was effectively not there. Meaning there was no there in the 2.5 years of stories that they were pushing. No reflection. Even after Mueller, no reflection. They immediately went from Trump and Russia, a story that they had been failing on for 2 years, to obstruction of justice. We don't need it in reflection. Some even pat themselves on the back. When the IG report came out and it found that the stuff that they had been being leaked and they just repeat it to the audience, even that found to be lacking. Meaning the CIA, the FBI was using these guys for political ends. And instead of feeling some kind of way about that, instead of, having a kumbaya moment, look, we pushed the Steele dossier and it seems to be fraudulent. We pushed the Trump and Russia thing. There was no there to that. That kumbaya never took place. That self-reflection never took place. They were effectively stenographers with all sorts of people who were leaking things for all sorts of reasons without any kind of reflection on whether or not they were even accurate. Where's our antagonistic media? Nowhere to be found here on this case. Bernie Sanders is the white candidate. That's a big one. Bernie Sanders makes my skin crawl. That's a big one. Bernie Sanders is against women. That's a big one. Whether it's MSNBC, whether it's CNN, they take these narratives about this particular candidate. It's only now that they're even acknowledging that the man is in the race. Up to this point, they tried to pretend like he was not standing there or that he had no chances in the process. At the very least, they're acknowledging him now, but that wasn't necessarily an easy thing to get to. They had pretended as if the guy wasn't there for the longest time. And look, I know other candidates may complain about this, but I think you can look at very specific information from the way that they handled Sanders, the negative publicity or the negative way that they would talk about him, etc. The media treated him or treats him in a particular way that is somewhat different than the other candidates, namely that his chances are little to nil, when the reality of it is, I would say the opposite. The claim that the FISA warrants weren't derived from the Steele dossier. That's another big one. Over and over again, when Nunes came out with his memo and made the point that the Steele dossier was essentially the origins of those FISA documents, people said, nope, that's not true. That's not the case. There was other things that went into this notion of spying on Carter Page. The IG report makes the point that's not true. In fact, the IG goes further and makes the point that it was essential to them ever getting the FISA warrant in the first place. Media repeated this for the past year. And yet, it was not in any way true. There would never be a coming to account. Not caring about the origins of Russiagate. I find that to be somewhat of a big deal. John Durham comes in, the IG report, and Mueller makes the point that this was a conspiracy theory, with not much to go on in order to provoke this conspiracy theory. Ultimately, Democrats hated Trump, so they were perfectly okay with it. Media hated Trump. Not to mention, it's a pretty good financial motive. The president of the United States is a Manchurian candidate getting orders from Vladimir Putin, and they ran with it for 2.5 years. And when that was found to be lacking and a conspiracy theory, at no point did they say, how did this start? They didn't care. I kept it moving. It's amazing that they ignore this stuff. The Afghan files, they come out saying that the presidents of the United States, Trump, Bush, and Obama were flagrantly lying to the United States. And not just flagrantly lying, it went beyond that. It went all the way into changing the results of information coming out of Afghanistan in order to skew it almost in a 1984 way to make it seem like Afghanistan, there was progress taking place. They were all lying. All of them, including the military on this front. There's a story where Leon Panetta is nearly hit with a suicide bomb and still comes out and says, everything is going great, we're making progress. That's a big fucking deal. That's a big deal. Barely covered. It barely gets a blip. The fact that all of your last presidents have been lying to you through their teeth. We spent nearly $1 trillion in Afghanistan. We've lost thousands. Not to mention the number of Afghanis who've died in that process, meaning from trying to get them to be cops or police force. No reflection. Why are we in the Ukraine? We're talking about the impeachment thing. No one asked the question about why we're in the Ukraine in the first place. Doesn't come up. Doesn't get brought up. No one asked whether or not we even should be in the Ukraine. Should we be supplying weapons? Obama didn't supply weapons. Why should Trump supply weapons? Why is that such a big deal? I mean, even going into this notion of human sources, the media has been trumpeting this notion like it's a clear-cut case when there are no human sources on the Ukrainian side to make that stick. And even the person, Sunderland, under cross-examination says, it was my presumption. That doesn't get talked about. That doesn't get aired. Trump's guilty. That's the perspective. Nancy Pelosi is some kind of saint, and the Democrats are doing God's work, and the Republicans are somehow mischievous in this process. That's the narrative. And that's the narrative that they've ran with on MSNBC and CNN for the most part of mainstream media. It always aggravates me that these stories get missed. Some of this has to do with an American perspective. Whatever the U.S. is doing in the world, it is right by definition. We may make mistakes like, wiping off 1 million Iraqis when saying that they were weapons of mass destruction when they weren't. But we mean well. And because we mean well, the world is great. And we immediately drop the United States from any conversation. Meaning the context of U.S. actions gets dropped when we're looking at how other people respond to us. So with North Korea, the guy's just crazy. As opposed to the guy's terrified that you're going to topple his government and he thinks that a nuclear missile is the only thing that's going to keep you from doing such. Well, that makes him look like a rational actor. You can say he's a dictator. Yes, you can see that country is slightly, comical and definitely not somewhere you would want to live considering it's a totalitarian state. That is also true. But is he insane for thinking that the U.S. may knock him over considering that the U.S. and South Korea run joint exercises? Even that conversation. The notion that the U.S. says, okay, we're going to hold off on the joint exercises in order to while we're in this negotiation. Even that, by mainstream media, is considered to be, that's beyond the pale. We can't believe that Trump is going to do that. There's a perspective that goes into way media talks about items. And I'm making the point that that perspective either ignores, downplays, or entirely misses the stories that are vastly important for us to understand our world. Last one. This. 2 years ago, the New York Times comes out with a bombshell story saying that the United States military has been, or the Pentagon has been studying UFOs. Now, this, to many people who are in the UFO community, said, no shit, Sherlock. They've been studying them for decades. But there's still relevance here. Because the fact that this program exists, people start asking, A, wow, and B, what did you find? Almost around the exact same time, videos start to be released from the Pentagon. This is one of them. Now, I've often said that the videos are less important than the people who are involved in the process. Meaning, you've had the Nimitz, you've had other encounters in these various ships, you've had encounters in nuclear facilities. All of this stuff had been taking place for years, but this is the first time that it was actually hitting the press. New York Times, Politico, hell, even the Young Turks, Fox News, CNN, all of these media organizations started to cover this very specific story that the U.S. was studying UFOs. ATIP project. Around the exact same time, Tom DeLonge comes out with various people who were involved in this process. And these people start talking to the media. Luis Elizondo is the guy who was running that project. This is him on CNN.
And there's still, by the way, a lot we really don't know. I think what's important is that we have identified some very, very interesting, anomalous type of aircraft. Let's call them aircraft. Things that don't have any obvious flight surfaces, any obvious forms of propulsion, and maneuvering in ways that include extreme maneuverability beyond, I would submit, the healthy G-forces of a human or anything biological. Hypersonic velocities, low observability, positive lift, again, seemingly in defying the laws of aerodynamics. So people
so do
are
you
talking.
Think, I mean, I know, but do you believe, when you get that Navy pilot saying what he said, do you think that was, a UFO? To obviously, I don't have any other word to use, or that, or something else?
Sure, that's a great question. Keeping in mind, it's not just the pilot's testimony on an observation. Sure, when someone comes to you who's in charge of a multi-million-dollar weapon platform, who maintains a top-secret security clearance, who is paid and trusted by this country to go fight wars and to fly over cities with live munitions, and by the way, they're trained observers with millions of dollars invested in their training.
Yep.
I would submit to you it's pretty compelling. But on top of that, it's not just the eyewitness testimony. It is actual electro-optical data and radar returns. It's also people like radar operators and air traffic controllers. So I think the discussion should be maybe a little bit broader than that. I think people are focusing just on 2 videos coming from a set of F-18s when really it's a lot more than that.
So recently, I guess it was in October, astronomers spotted what
and are very emotional about that. And what I want a type of controlled airspace. Well, I think there's a lot of possibilities.
Look, and I know you think it's important. I know you think that the government didn't take the threat seriously enough. So let me just ask you point blank the question: do you believe that life from somewhere else, while you ran this program, came here, visited, observed?
I will tell you unequivocally that through the observation, scientific methodologies that were applied to look at this phenomena, that these aircraft, we'll call them aircraft, are displaying characteristics that are not currently within the U.S. inventory, nor in any foreign inventory that we are aware of.
So I know you're being clear, but I mean, the answer is yes.
I can't speak on behalf of the government. Obviously, I'm not in the U.S. government anymore. My personal belief is that there is very compelling evidence that we may not be alone.
Right there. Now, to me, that's a bombshell. But by the way, this is not the bombshell I'm even talking about. Luis Elizondo was the one who was running that program. And if you look at other videos of Luis Elizondo, he's going far deeper and far further into explaining what they were finding when they were observing and they were carrying out this research. Another thing drops. You get to see what the U.S. military was studying, all of these advanced and weird physics, everything from invisibility, from electrogravitics, across the board. Warp drive stuff. I mean, it was weird and bizarre physics that looked like it would fit further into Star Trek as opposed to what we would typically be studying. The pilot, in one of these instances, and by the way, it's not just the pilots. You have Navy generals. I've shown these videos where these guys come out, they were asked the question, were there things in your flight space that you didn't necessarily know what they were, and exhibiting these bizarre qualities, let's say it that way, that we couldn't touch? And he says, yes, for a time, this was taking place. Our Navy changes their protocols and allows people to be able to give their stories on the things that they've been seeing from the standpoint of pilots. The New York Times also reported that pilots have started to see more of these items. Now, I've done videos before showing this stuff had been taking place before, especially around nuclear facilities. But nevertheless, this is hitting the airwaves, so it's apt. Listen to Fravor talk about what he saw. He was up there in this encounter. He was up there for 5 minutes.
Sent out to the west. Now, take in mind that this has taken place about 100 miles southwest of San Diego, between San Diego
and by the way, just so we're clear, there are multiple encounters. These are just the ones that hit the airwaves. And To the Stars Academy has gone further. Their argument is, we don't just have videos, we also have materials. We also have materials, and this is where this bombshell is coming in. But let's hear Fravor first.
in Ensenada, Mexico,
Yeah.
On a clear, perfect day, blue waters. We get out to the spot where they tell us it's at. We start looking around, and both airplanes see a disturbance in the water and a white 40-foot long tic-tac shaped object just hovering above the water, going forward, back, left, right. There's no rotor wash, there's no wings, nothing. So as we drive around in a clockwise flow, we get to about the 9 o'clock position, and I said, well, I'm going to go down and check it out, and the other jet is going to stay high. So as we go down, when we get to the 12 o'clock position, it starts to mirror us. So it's in a clockwise flow, and it's on the opposite side of the circle from us. And we continue this. It's in a climb. We're in a descent. We're getting a great look at it. This whole thing takes about probably up to 5 minutes from the time we show up. I get over to the 8 o'clock position. It's at about the 2 o'clock position, and I decide I'm going to go and see what it is, and it's about 2,000 feet below me. And I cut across the circle, and as I get within about a half mile of it, it rapidly accelerates to the south in about 2 seconds and disappears.
What would you estimate the speed?
Oh, well above supersonic. It like a bullet out of a gun, it took off.
Now, this is not, again, just one or two pallets. This is several. And as the way the New York Times reports it, more pilots have been seeing these. And again, the Navy is not changing their protocols on this for no reason. They're changing the protocols because they needed to change the protocols. The moment that you have videos out like this showing that your pilot is encountering things that they don't necessarily know what they are, and the public gets wind of that, you have congressmen asking you about it, you have people wanting to be briefed. By the way, and this is not just the U.S., there's stories. I could show you pilots from the UK who said similar things. They were sent out to investigate objects that they did not know what they were and had flight qualities that they could not in anywhere come close to. Fravor was out there on 9/11. He's not lying. The other pilots are not lying. The data from the Nimitz ship is not lying. These pilots are encountering something. One or two things are true at this point. It's either us or it's not. There is nothing in between those things. It's either us or it's not. If it's us, that's still mind-blowing because you have this situation where our pilots who are head of these aircraft who can do amazing fucking things are seeing something that they cannot come close to and look at it and say, it's so advanced that it's not us. Meaning the pilots who are watching this is coming away saying, this is not us. We can't replicate these capabilities, nor is it any other government on this country, on this earth, that replicates these capabilities. If that's true, that means we're in store of some technology that is so advanced that when our own pilots are looking at it, it seems otherworldly. That in and of itself is an issue. Or, of course, if it's not us, then, oh my God. To the Stars Academy was formed with this notion of getting that information out to the public. Meaning Tom DeLonge was heavy in this notion of the UFO community. He gets pulled into, let's say, some people who are part of, I would say, the intelligence community. This is why I don't necessarily trust Tom DeLonge or this entirely, even though I appreciate the information getting out. I'm somewhat skeptical of their motives. But nevertheless, Tom DeLonge says, let me be the conduit to which this information gets out into the public. Tom DeLonge starts To the Stars Academy. You have all of these physicists and all of these spooks who, for the most part, back Tom DeLonge in this, and they come out to help him and join this organization with him. Tom DeLonge, believe it or not, is in the WikiLeaks documents, the Podesta leaks. And in those leaks, you find that he's having these conversations with people saying, look, I need this or I need that in order to come out and bring this stuff to fruition. It's utterly fascinating. To the Stars Academy, who wants to build a rocket ship, I said it is impossible for them to do what they want to do without mega funding. Meaning that if you're going to get funding, the places who have it is the U.S. government. And they have it in spades. If you can make people scared enough and think that there's something out there that we don't know what it is, we can't necessarily control, we don't have control of our airspace. If you make people believe that there's something that's a threat to us. And by the way, nobody has ever said it was a threat to us. That was our phrasing of it. That was our framing of it. These ships have been engaging craft, or at the very least have been around, but the only way that they're become a threat is if you engage it. Meaning, if you're a China or Russian aircraft that try to take it down, then oftentimes those pilots, based on their own incompetence, ends up sometimes on bad ends. That's nothing to do with the crafts themselves or whatever they're encountering. That's everything to do with them. Our framing of the world, look at this stuff, is if we can't control it, then it's somewhat of a threat to us. I suspect part of the reason that we don't even bring it up, or this acknowledgement, that would be a separate video. My basic point is this. The goal of TTSA, stated goal anyway, is to get information out into the public, and that they were going to be investigating this stuff in a way that is going to be transparent, where people can look at the investigation and so forth. One of their claims is that they have access to extrusions from those craft, meaning the research they have been doing. They're saying that, look, we have access to actual metamaterials. Now, some people may say, okay, they're full of it on this. Here's the catch. With the Navy and with Tom DeLonge getting, let's say with the connections that Tom DeLonge have, where he was able to get these videos out, and he was also able to get these people doing these videos and everything else, talking to media and whatnot about what they encountered and about the program. You also have this. To the Stars Academy announces CRADA with the U.S. Army. Now, what does this mean? Right here. To the Stars of Arts and Science announces today a cooperative research and development agreement with the U.S. Army Combat Capabilities Development Command to advance TTSA's materials and technology innovations in order to develop enhanced capabilities for Army ground vehicles. TTSA Technology Solutions, with leverage developments in material sciences, space-time metric engineering, quantum physics, beam energy propulsion, and active camouflage, have the potential to enhance survivability and effectiveness of Army services. TTSA would share its discoveries with Ground Vehicles Systems Center and Ground Vehicle Survivability and Protection, and the U.S. Army shall provide laboratories, expertise, support, and resources to help characterize the technologies and its applications. Again, what they're talking about is TTSA supposedly having access to certain materials, and they are working with the U.S. government, let's say, to do that research on those materials and to figure out how it can be used to the benefit of our military. Now, when you read this part, you think to yourself, okay, these guys are full of shit. The problem is this part. This is an overt agreement. This is not in secret. This is not the U.S. military going behind the scenes to work with a company in order to deal with materials that they think are out of this world. In the same way that the Navy has come out and said, yes, these videos, or the Pentagon has come out and says, yes, these videos are real. And that the Navy has come out and changed their protocols. And that the commander, being asked the question about UFOs, answers that question in the affirmative. Yes, this is taking place all in the open. This is new. This has never happened before, at least in my knowledge. If TTSA was bullshitting on this, the military would not be working with them, nor would they be working with them in the open. That's the bombshell. The UFO stuff was the bombshell back last year, you could say it. And at the point where a gentleman who's working for our government is investigating UFOs, and he tells you, yes, there's something out there. Based on my scientific research over the past several years, yes, there's something out there. Luis Elizondo goes further and says, we have the physics on how to model how they fly. Our material sciences and whatnot are not up to the point of being able to replicate it, but mathematically, we can at the very least explain it. Well, these guys are working with the Army. Now, that should terrify you in one sense, because in one sense, this is an acknowledgement, again, a further acknowledgement that there's a there to what they're talking about. But on top of there being a there to what they're talking about, what exotic materials are these guys working with, and what are the applications? Now, TTSA is making the argument that it would have dual applications, one part for the military and one part for the civilians, or commercialization and public benefit. What are they working on? What is the weird physics that these guys are coming up with? Look, I think part of the issue here is that the moment that you come out as president and tell the public that there's something in your space, something in our skies that we don't necessarily know what it is, they have advanced capabilities that we can't necessarily replicate. It's not coming from any other country on this planet. And our best technology looks like toys. Have a nice day. The catch here is your society has to be used to living under threat. Not threat because there's an actual threat of something that may end your civilization, but more so that there's something that you just don't know that is out there, that is engaging you. And you have to be able to live under that knowledge without freaking out, without burning shit to the ground. Congratulations, you're not alone. I don't quite know why you thought that in the first place. God was so precious, he created Earth as this little thing. No, that's an insane belief, and that's a religious belief. Life evolves. Life evolves even in volcanic pits. I have no idea why it wouldn't necessarily evolve anywhere else. And our physics is what? Maybe 100, 200 years? Why do you believe that that would be the bee's knees and the height of everything? And yet we do. We're ball hurling through space. All right. This video has gone long. Give me your stories. What do you think are the top stories that are either missed, not talked about, not brought up sufficiently over the course of the last year? These are my three. OPCW being ignored, media is essentially falling in line with the government whims in spite of what's more likely to be true, meaning no self-reflection in the way that they do their stories and continually getting the stories wrong based on narratives that they promote as opposed to what's more likely to be true. And last, TTSA is working openly with the U.S. military to deal with metamaterials, essentially materials that they are saying was extruded from craft. It's fucking interesting. TTSA is not what you think it is, far more likely than this being legit. Well, look, I don't know what TTSA is. What I think it is, look, Tom DeLonge has in his head the bad alien theory. Because he had the bad alien theory, I'm skeptical of him, just right off the bat. TTSA as getting the information out, I accept that part, yes, because the story should have never been taken as this kind of insane part. The story was always credible. They just used intelligence services interacted with the story in a way to make it seem less legit than what it was. That's all. But that said, I like the fact that the story is out. I like the fact that it's considered to be, this is standard fare. Meaning this is the reality of things. The pilots are engaging with something. What they're engaging within, it becomes a question mark. But the pilots are engaging something. So I like the fact that that's out. I like the fact that the videos are out. I have no issue with that. Tom DeLonge has a view of intelligence services that I don't have. Making him, to me, put a questioning mark on all of this. Even though I accept that the information they're putting out at the very least gets across this issue to the audience. The coordination with media or military on this, I suppose you can make a case that in order for you to investigate this stuff, you need a huge amount of money. And so using threat is one of the means of getting that cash from the U.S. military. And the fact that the Pentagon has said, yes, these are videos. The fact that the U.S. Navy has come on and says, yes, and we're changing our protocols. Again, commanders saying, yes, these are things that we were encountering. The fact that all of this stuff is taking place overt, including this. The U.S. military didn't have to disclose this, but it's disclosed. There's always a politics to it, right? The things that you show versus the things that you don't. This is something that they're openly announcing. This organization that is working with UFOs is now working with the U.S. Army. If that doesn't give a certain degree of legitimacy to it, because either the U.S. Army is full of conspiracy theories, or there's actually a there to this. So it's not that I don't think TTSA is serious in their intentions. It's more so I don't trust what I think those intentions are. But I do think there is a dovetail in the case of that they want to get the information out. It's what they get out and what's in Tom DeLonge's head in regards to this stuff. Because Tom DeLonge only knows what he's been told or what he's read. And that doesn't get you anywhere. Especially if the goal of it is to manipulate. I'll leave this here. Like, share, subscribe. Thanks all. Give me yours, by the way. In fact, the media stories that you think were missed or just got plainly wrong, send those stories to me on Twitter, at the Prague Soapbox, or put them below. I'd be curious to hear what else you guys are thinking about it. Thanks all.